there is only one manager in the entirety of football history to win the World Cup, Champions League, the European Championship, and the FIFA Club World Cup in their career. And his name is Vicente del Bosque. Despite hearing that, I don't think many of you truly understand just how successful of a manager he was. But this might blow your mind. Jose Mourinho has won 26 major trophies and 1,175 appearances as a manager, averaging roughly one trophy every 45 matches. Don Carlo Ancelotti has won 31 trophies in 1,351 matches, averaging a trophy roughly every 43.5 matches. Sir Alex Ferguson, one of the most successful managers of all time, won 38 major trophies in 1,500 matches, averaging a trophy every 39.5 matches. But Vicente del Bosque, well, in 342 matches, he would win 9 trophies, averaging a major piece of silverware every 38 matches. His efficiency was unquestionable, and his achievements have yet to be matched by any manager. But when you look at his career, it is alarming to see that he wasn't even able to manage more than 400 matches. And that seems a little strange, because as impressive as Vicente del Bosque's resume is, he's still a largely underrated and often underestimated tactician. And one of, if not the biggest reason he was never taken more seriously as manager was for the simple yet ridiculous reason that he was known as boring. They said he had no personality, or that he didn't look the part. Mind you, these are words coming from no other than Florentino Pérez himself, which is ironic, as Del Bosque's victories and trophies would save Pérez from being fired as Real Madrid's president. But we'll get more into that later. However, as nonsensical as those reasons are behind him being a good manager or not, it is kinda hard to argue, compared to other legendary managers and their swagger, or as kids say these days, aura. Vicente del Bosque looked pretty out of place. Personally, I think his calmness and lack of emotion showed plenty of aura. But for many, it never seemed that way, because whether his team lost or won, he'd rarely show any emotion on his face, always looking constantly disinterested or even stoic, depending on how you see it. Kind of like the embodiment of the Easter Island head emoji on the pitch. When you looked at him, he was a very quiet and soft-spoken manager, but the truth behind it was that he was a silent killer, and one of the finest managers not only of his era, but in history. Unfortunately, no matter how efficient he was, his lack of flamboyancy was mistaken for weakness and incompetence, and that really never sat right with me. So today, I'm here to remind everyone of his incredible rise and unfair downfall, as one of football's most underrated and underappreciated managers. But his personality and behavior actually really matches well with his upbringing. As a teenager, Del Bosque spent 2 seasons with Real Madrid B. And after finally being promoted to the senior team, his dream of walking onto the pitch with a Madrid kit was always elusive. For a good 3 years, he was repeatedly sent out on loan, and it wouldn't be until he was 23 years old, after experiencing football in every corner of Spain, that he would finally return to Madrid and be a part of the squad. Now, Vicente del Bosque was never a superstar or anything, but he was definitely holding his own as a defensive midfielder. Over the years, he would become a calming presence on the ball, playing with intelligence rather than flair or athleticism. And in his 13 seasons with Real Madrid, he would win 5 La Liga titles and 4 Copa del Rey trophies. But while Del Bosque was one of those rare Real Madrid players that got to spend over 10 years with the club, his days as a player would ultimately be overshadowed by his time as a manager. He wasn't flashy, he didn't rely on revolutionary tactics, and he wasn't a loud presence on the sidelines. Instead, his strengths were in managing egos, keeping squads united, earning respect from players without demanding it, and understanding what kind of talent worked best together. After 3 years of managing Real Madrid's youth team, he would only take over as Real Madrid manager for a couple of months in 1994 as the temporary caretaker. In 1996, it would happen once more. Once again, a very temporary manager, only in charge for a couple of games. That's why in 1999, when he was fully selected to be Real Madrid's manager, the appointment was seen as uninspiring. Ever increasingly in Real Madrid, star power mattered more than coaching ability, and few thought that Del Bosque had the authority to control a dressing room full of superstars. Most fans even thought he was going to be a temporary placeholder once more. But against all odds, Del Bosque delivered, and he built a team that dominated Europe. When Del Bosque took charge, Madrid had a promising squad. Young talents like Iker Casillas and Raúl mixed with experienced leaders like Fernando Hierro and Redondo. The team initially struggled in the Champions League group stages, suffering 2 defeats to Bayern Munich, and doubts started to grow. Then came the defining moment, facing Sir Alex Ferguson's Manchester United in the 2000 Champions League quarter-final. The first leg in Madrid ended in a tense 0-0 draw, but heading to Old Trafford, he made a bold adjustment, shifting his defense into the back three and giving Roberto Carlos and Salgado the freedom to attack. And this plan worked perfectly. Madrid would then blitz United with lightning-fast counters, leading to a commanding 3-0 lead within the match. The move was so bold that Sir Alex Ferguson himself admitted that even he was caught off guard. From then on, they would go on to beat Bayern in the semis and Valencia in the final, securing a sweet 8th European Cup for the club. In just a few months, Del Bosque went from an overlooked caretaker to the mastermind behind Madrid's European resurgence. Though Madrid was thriving on the pitch. Off the pitch, however, chaos was brewing. Club president Lorenzo Sanz, who had overseen Madrid's return to European glory, though passionate about winning football, was in deep financial trouble. And his departure would open the door for a new era, one led by Florentino Pérez. His election campaign promised glamour, saying to the Madrid fans the first thing that he would do was sign Luis Figo from Barcelona, a statement which at the time seemed ridiculous. But when Pérez eventually won, Madrid's identity began to shift overnight. For now, Del Bosque remained. Despite Pérez's obsession with signing superstars, he decided to stick with the boring manager that just won the Champions League for now. However, cracks were already forming. Del Bosque was all about stability and unity, finding the right talent to play the right way to win matches. However, Pérez's goal was different. He wanted global appeal and superstar names. That's why the following 2000-2001 season, Pérez would convince his target, Luis Figo, to come and sign for Madrid. But it was Del Bosque who wanted to find players that would help contribute to long-term success. And this led him to sign a comparatively unknown player from Celta de Vigo, named Claude Makelele. And with this healthy mix of superstars and compatible players, Madrid would be crowned the 2000-2001 La Liga champions, and though they would be eliminated by Bayern Munich in the Champions League semi-final. Overall, the club was getting much more consistent, and next season would come their biggest statement yet, signing Zinedine Zidane. And with the best player in the world at the time under his command, Del Bosque would adjust his system and shape the midfield to be built around Zidane's brilliance, allowing fullbacks like Roberto Carlos and Salgado to bomb forward. Figo would add width, and Raúl and Morientes would lead the line in a 4-1-3-2 formation. But despite a painful loss in the Copa del Rey final to Deportivo, in the Champions League, Madrid locked in. They would knock out Bayern and Barcelona on their way to the final. There, Zidane and his stunning volley against Bayer Leverkusen would bring Madrid their 9th European crown. This Madrid squad was the perfect mix of superstars and underappreciated role players that really led to stability and victories in the biggest moments. After all, Del Bosque believed in simplicity, and it was that approach that won him 2 Champions League titles in 3 seasons. Madrid hadn't seen European dominance like this since the days of Di Stefano and Puskás. While Pérez funded the squad, it was Del Bosque's tactics, man management, and understanding of the game that made it all work. The following 2002-2003 season, Pérez would only further continue his Galácticos campaign, and this year was highlighted with the addition of no other than Ronaldo from Internacional. And this season, Madrid would win the La Liga title, the UEFA Super Cup, and the Intercontinental Cup. You would think that 2 Champions League titles and 2 league titles would be good in 4 seasons. But more and more, the cracks between Del Bosque and Pérez were starting to show. And immediately after the season ended, Del Bosque was sacked, a decision that many consider is one of the most unfair sackings in football history. Some might argue that Del Bosque was too boring for Pérez's flashy and global vision. Some did question if he could even manage a team full of superstars, especially with David Beckham on the way, even though he already showed that he can do that just perfectly fine. But regardless of what you think, from a pure footballing standpoint, firing him made 0 sense. Because despite the Galáctico super team, after firing Del Bosque, it would take them 4 years to win the title once more. Heck, since firing Del Bosque in the Champions League, Real Madrid wouldn't even make it past the round of 16 until all the way in the 2010-2011 season. It's clear that for Madrid there was no better managerial choice after him, until basically a decade later. But regardless, Del Bosque left with his legacy intact. After that, Del Bosque would have a brief managerial stint in Besiktas, but that would only last a couple of months. After that, for a few years, he basically went into retirement. It wouldn't be until over 3 years later that Spain would come calling, asking Del Bosque to take over Luis Aragonés and manage a very stacked and upcoming Spanish golden generation. A squad with guys like Xavi, Iniesta, David Silva, Xabi Alonso, Fernando Torres, David Villa, Busquets, Fabregas, Puyol, Ramos, Casillas, and even more talented players on the bench that could easily start for other national teams as well, like Santi Cazorla, Juan Mata, or Mikel Arteta. It sounds easy, but how do you even find a way to put everyone in a position where they can play their best and be the most comfortable, especially in a team that was very midfield heavy? Expectations for Del Bosque were sky high, and when Spain would lose their 2010 World Cup opener to Switzerland, the pressure to win was at its highest. But as he always did, Del Bosque stayed calm, and one of his biggest challenges was helping Andres Iniesta, as he was struggling emotionally after the death of his friend Dani Jarque. And when Del Bosque played him in Spain's opening loss to Switzerland, Iniesta wasn't looking as sharp as he usually did, but Del Bosque would handle it calmly. He would rest Iniesta for the next game, prioritizing his mental health over the tactics. While many were criticizing his decisions because, well, why would you ever bench Andres Iniesta? His time on the sideline actually helped him regain composure and lit a fire to come back in and be competitive. Reflecting on this, Del Bosque said, "A coach has to put human relationship above the sport." And as we all know, Spain would slowly start to turn things up, finally facing Netherlands in the World Cup final. And that was one of the most physical matches ever. The Dutch were seriously manhandling Spain physically. But at halftime, Del Bosque would tell his team, "We aren't soldiers. We aren't here to fight. We're players. Let's defend the beauty of football." And with that, Spain didn't let the physicality dictate the match. They remained calm and played their Spanish way, slowly finding space and slowly advancing up the pitch. And eventually, in extra time, they would break through. And Del Bosque became just the second coach in history to lift both the Champions League and World Cup trophy. And people thought he had it easy just because he had the Spanish golden generation. But after the World Cup, you have to remember, most of those players in Spain played for either Real Madrid or Barcelona. Barcelona and Real Madrid faced each other 5 times in 18 days. Jose Mourinho taught his Spanish Madrid players to absolutely hate their Barcelona counterparts. And when it came to the 2012 Euros, Del Bosque had to manage those relationships. Plus, it would also help that the Spanish players all greatly respected him. And when they entered Euro 2012, they really didn't have an informed striker. After multiple injuries, both Fernando Torres and David Villa weren't in their best form. So without any real striker, Del Bosque would adapt to using a false 9 system with David Silva, Iniesta, and Fabregas leading the attack. But with this change, Spain would cruise through the tournament, saving their best for the final in a dominant 4-0 win over Italy. And with that, he became only the second manager in history to win both the World Cup and Euros in the same team. But with all great teams, the decline was inevitable. By 2016, Spain was but a shell of its former self. Their best players had aged, and their backup players were out of form. Spain would eventually fall to Italy in the round of 16, and just like that, the golden generation was over. Del Bosque's managerial career was unfairly cut short, especially just because of his poor relationship with Florentino Pérez. However, his legacy wasn't just about tactics, it was about leadership and understanding your players. Whether you see him as just lucky to have such talented players, or maybe only recognize him as a master of man management or talent matching ability, either way, his place in football history is secure. No manager has yet matched the achievements of Vicente del Bosque.